And more recently, people have started to talk about the WHO Pandemic Agreement, which was partially voted on last year and is going to be finalised in May this year. We don't need this pandemic agreement to actually implement that kind of overarching control across the globe. Is it because the spirit of the papacy, the dictatorship, has actually become the face of every one of us, if we haven't rejected it? Today, my presentation is breaking free from the health dictatorship. So how many of us sense we've got something wrong with our health, or we could be better at our health? And a lot of people, health has become somewhat of a burden to them because the way that they actually go about pursuing health has become a burden. They become increasingly dependent on a swag of things. And it might not necessarily be pharmaceuticals, it might just be your supplements and things like that, or it might be, this regimen and this, I do these things, and then I in the morning I do that, and then at lunchtime, and then at evening, and it just becomes a burden for them to do all of these different things. When we haven't really addressed the underlying problems that cause the health issues, then we end up with a burden. Because these are all just band-aids. They're just quick fixes. And we have a little bit of blind faith with a lot of these things that we enter into. Someone who, I like to move around a lot, but I've got to make sure that I don't trip on anything. There's a lot of people who, they go and they'll listen to something on YouTube. There's often these ads on YouTube where, the latest scientist has found that if you don't have tomatoes, then you're going to be fine. If you don't eat this, or if you only eat that. We've come across, Daniel's come across people who only have carrots and then they turn orange and they don't get better. So there's a lot of, things that people do with blind faith, and God doesn't want us to have blind faith. And then there's the issue of this. If we have a dependence on something that we need to acquire through purchasing it, and having supply chains, then if they're ever disrupted, then you don't have your path to health, do you? Or you become able to be manipulated. If you need this in order to survive, and someone puts a barrier in front of you and that, you'll do anything that they ask you to do in order to have whatever it is that's your path to health. And then there's this kind of health dictatorship. I know that some of you might not necessarily agree with me, but I personally believe over the period of the pandemic, there was a dictatorship happening. If you don't do this, you will lose your job, potentially lose your home, you'll certainly lose friends, and you'll lose access to certain kinds of places. It was a dictatorship. Thankfully, in Australia, it's not as bad as what happened in places like Rwanda. We got to meet a person who's become a good friend a couple of weeks ago, who is from Rwanda, and he said, you've got to speak to this man over in Rwanda. He was a journalist that was going into Rwanda when everything else was sort of shut down. He still managed to move about, and he got to see what was happening, and he's got really amazing stories of where people were actually rounded up and vaccinated against their will. So this is a group of Pentecostal church members who rejected getting the vaccine, and they claimed they were held for a week by military police and local leaders. And they refused to take the jabs, and instead asked the soldiers and police to shoot them or drown them to death, which is pretty dramatic, but that's what they were prepared to do. And it says, when they realized, the authorities realized, we were not ready to change our minds, they brought in many police officers and we were handcuffed, and the police officers held us to the ground and we were vaccinated. And this was the kind of, he wasn't telling me this news story, I just, Googled, I wanted to have something. This is the kind of things that he was telling me that was happening. Why do we actually see these kinds of behaviors when we hadn't seen them for decades, centuries, for the last, 200 years or so? We haven't seen this kind of dictatorship. Well, the thing is, we are living at the end of the world as we know it. Does anyone remember watching this show, Beyond 2000? I think it was peculiar to Australia. I'm not sure whether it went anywhere else. We had Australian journalists on it, so I'm assuming it was Australian. And I remember I used to, with my parents, we used to sit down, I think it was on a Sunday afternoon or something, I can't remember what time it was, and we'd watch this thing about technology was going to be the answer to everything. And in the year 2000 was going to mark this massive milestone where we launched into these technological advancements that were going to deal with all of the world's problems. Do you remember that? And it was so exciting. I wasn't a committed Christian then. So to me, I was like, wow, these things are amazing. But as a Christian, it's not just the end of the world as we know it. I believe it's actually the end of Earth's history. But how do I know? Is it because of things like this? Do you remember, for those of you who are old enough, and most of you here are old enough, you remember the year 1999, and as it ticked closer to the year 2000, and they were going, oh, there's the Y2K bug. Everything's going to shut down. It's going to be chaos. We're going to be launched into darkness. Every computer's going to stop working. You're not going to be able to get money out of the ATM. It's just going to be the end of the world as we know it. And the year 2000 ticked over, midnight, and everything stayed the same. And everyone went, oh, this whole end of the world stuff, it's just all a big hoax. Anytime that anyone talks about the end of the world, it never happens. The world keeps going on. Or what about in 2012? I remember my auntie actually watched a movie about this, and she was a little bit paranoid that when the Mayan calendar came to an end in 2012, that would spark the end of the world. And 2012 came around and you had articles like this, end of the world hype fizzles as Mayan calendar comes to an end. People become a little bit cynical when you say these things, but as Christians, if you know your Bible, you know that technology is never going to be the answer to all of our problems. You know that no calendar date is really the key to understanding the end of the world. The Bible successfully predicted or prophesied the Babylonian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, the rise of the American Empire, and it has also successfully predicted the replica of the Holy Roman Empire. And all of those things stem back from the book of Daniel. When was that written? It was in the 7th century BC. All of this was predicted and so successfully, so right in how it was going to unfold. But something that we know that the Bible has also predicted, not only these different kingdoms which help us to track the stream of time, not dates, but kingdoms and events. The other thing that has predicted is there's going to be a global dictatorship at the end of time. It will demand all the earth to worship. And it will persecute those who do not comply. So they'll be killed. They won't be able to buy or sell. But what does the Bible actually call this end time dictatorship? It's called Babylon. And at some point, it becomes fallen. What does that mean? Is it just that it becomes sinful, like, Adam and Eve, they fell? No. Actually, the word there means under judgment and losing authority. Now, the word Babylon is also significant because it means confusion. Did we not see during COVID some unusually confusing things that would be recommended, like wearing a mask by yourself in a car? Like, serious, whether it's the chair or the steering wheel going to catch something from us, or we're going to get some, that's ridiculous. Why were they saying that? Those kinds of things were very, very confusing. Or even things like, there was research that came out that lifestyle practices, by the way, to be qualified to be a lifestyle medicine practitioner in the world, they want you to have a board certification in lifestyle medicine, which both Daniel and I have, but to truly be qualified to be a lifestyle medicine practitioner in God's eyes is you need to have a living connection with God. That's it. Because He can inform you. But You know, they had this research that said that lifestyle was actually more important in terms of preventing COVID and helping you to fight COVID than the vaccine. But they never once mentioned that in the media. That was a bit confusing. All right, so something else about this Babylon. It says that it's a habitation of the devils, a hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Basically, it's filled with evil, wicked practices. That's what that means. But it is also a great political, spiritual dictator. And that is identified in Revelation chapter 17. It says that it is the mother of harlots. It has abominations. And she was drunk with the blood of the saints and the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. Now, why do we know that that means that she is spiritual? Well, if you look at the Bible and you look at women in the Bible, because it actually says that, she is actually a subject of worship. But so we know that she's spiritual, but we also know that she is a church, because when she is a mother of harlots, she actually has this tendency to act a harlot towards God. That's how he identifies what is a harlot or not. He doesn't say, they're being unfaithful to Baal, or they're being, no, it's what their relationship to God is like. And they're a mother of harlots. So there is other churches that come from her that are actually unfaithful as well. And they particularly, it says here, it focuses in on the saints and those that worship Jesus. So clearly what you have here is something that has a spiritual focus. It's not saying it's the blood of the footballers, or, it specifically hones in on a spiritual group. And it reigns over the kings of the earth. This political, spiritual group reigns over the kings of the earth, and it is where it makes all nations drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Now, what does wine mean? As it says here, I'm just going to have a little sip of water, sorry. As it says here in Isaiah 28:7, but they, and this is actually talking about religious leaders, but they also have erred through wine, through strong drink, are out of the way. They are out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision, they stumble in judgment. So what it means when it says that all the nations have drunk of this wine, it means that it actually leads people astray. And in particular, it leads people spiritually astray. It is not so much just, I didn't know how to do something that's a secular thing. It's actually a spiritual thing. So it is actually teaching them doctrines and teachings that are contrary to God. And then, of course, it talks about how the kings of the earth have committed fornication. That just means an illicit union. They've joined with her in a way that they shouldn't. And then finally, the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. And it is this particular element that I'm going to focus in on as we get into this presentation a little bit more. So this end-time global political spiritual dictatorship will have the consent and cooperation of all the leaders, politicians, as well as the elites of the world. And I'll make that clearer as we go on. It has the cooperation of the merchants of the earth, and it has all nations signed up as well. But what has this got to do with the health dictatorship, which is where I begin? Why am I talking about this? Well, as we said, we all experienced it during COVID. I mean, even things like locking people up in their home when they're not sick. Is that not confusing? That's like a prison. It was a health dictatorship. So the end-time global dictatorship would include a health dictatorship. And it's said also in Revelation. It says, for the merchants were the great men of the earth, these ones that wax rich because the abundance of her delicacies. For by thy sorceries, and that word is pharmakia, were all nations deceived. And what does pharmakia mean? Well, we can kind of guess from how it sounds. It's pharmacy, poisons, magical arts associated with idolatry, and deceptions of idolatry. This is how the merchants of the earth become rich, because they're imbibing in these kinds of things. Now, talking about the health dictatorship, this article here tells you that when they were actually more dictatorial or authoritarian in their practices, it made no difference in the overall public health outcomes. So you went to a country where, they really were very free. You went to a country where they were very authoritarian. No difference. So was it really about health outcomes, or was it about setting up the final movements of Earth's history, which the Bible predicted? It was during this time that many of us, maybe most of us, I think, fall into this camp. Maybe there was a few that didn't, but many of us realized that the United Nations had a significant impact right down to the individual. I remember for many, many years, a lot of us have been aware of the fact that the United Nations has had this climate change agenda. And people have kind of mocked and scoffed if they've not really believed what they've come out with from the scientists. But they've kind of felt like it's this thing out there, removed bureaucratically from the individual at the local level. But once we went through COVID, people realized that the United Nations has an arm that reaches down through the leadership of the nation, down to the individual. And in particular, it was the World Health Organization that led on this. And more recently, people have started to talk about the WHO Pandemic Agreement, which was partially voted on last year and is going to be finalized in May this year. And one of the things that they're concerned about is the loss of sovereignty over every nation. Because, if this agreement is fully signed off on, all of the different nations of the world are going to be fully under the authority of the UN, and in particular the World Health Organization, if another pandemic was to occur. So whatever they say, the country has to do and the citizen has to comply. One of the things that is mentioned in here, the bit that they're going to be voting on in May, is the WHO Pathogen Access and Benefit Sharing System, which is actually about sharing data around diseases and pathogens that aren't currently circulating in the general population. And so there's this concern, and there's there is an incentive to load this information up onto the system, so that there is also an incentive to come up with new or novel pathogens, which you often get with gain of function research. That's a concern, isn't it? But before this era, 2025-26, there was the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and in one of them it says, in number 3, the Good Health and Wellbeing Sustainable Development Goal, 3.8, it says that everyone will be able to achieve health coverage, which included access to safe, effective, quality and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for all. So they see that the path to achieving good health and well-being is if you get vaccines and medicines. Sounds like, really lovely plan of theirs, because everyone wants to have vaccines and medicines. That was in 2015, in September 2015. And every country that had signed up to the Sustainable Development Goals, which is every country, by the way, basically says we need to bring vaccines and medicines to all. So they didn't really need the pandemic agreement to come up with this plan to implement medicines and vaccines for all, because they already had it. But even before that, in January 2015, the WHO SAGE report said, let's deal with vaccine hesitancy with social mobilization. Let's provide some pressure through social means and mass media and mandating vaccines and sanctions for non-vaccination. Does that not sound like what happened during COVID? Well, every government that signed up to the UN and is in with the WHO would have been abiding by this. They didn't need a pandemic agreement. But even before 2015 and 2005, there was the International Health Regulations, which actually, by the way, The very first international health regulation was in 1969. So there's been these regulations right from the get-go, and it says that they entered into force for all WHO member states. Those who did not actually go out of their way to reject it, just automatically it's now your law. And one of the things that they said, well, these regulations are based on the Charter of the United Nations. So even before 2005, right back in 1945, these principles were there. And then it says, universal application to all people of the world, and states have the sovereign right to legislate and to implement legislation in pursuance of their health policies. They have the right to make these kind of laws, even though it might contravene people's personal rights and convictions. That's okay. You have the right as a state of the UN. There's going to be no ramifications from the international community if you implement these things. And what were some of the regulations that were put in there? Proof of vaccination, require vaccination, place suspect persons, not unhealthy persons, suspect persons under public health observation. Implement quarantine or other health measures for suspect persons, not sick persons. Implement tracing of contacts of suspect or affected persons. Refuse entry of suspect persons. Refuse entry of unaffected persons to affected areas. Implement exit screening and or restrictions on persons from affected areas. This sounds like COVID, doesn't it? 2005, these regulations were there, but as I said, 1945. The United Nations Charter had the groundwork for this. It says, with a view to creation of conditions of stability, this is Article 55, creation of conditions of stability and well-being which are necessary for peaceful and friendly relations among nations. So this is about peace, by the way. This is not about health. Oh, sorry, no, it is about health. No, I'm not sure. Is it about peace or health? I think it's about peace. But anyway, let's continue on. Based on respect for the principles of equal rights and self-determination of peoples, the United Nations shall promote solutions of international, economic, social, health and related problems. So we're going to have the solutions, by the way. This is the UN saying this. And all members, this is every nation that has signed up to the UN, pledge themselves to take joint and separate action in cooperation with the organisation. If a country wants to be a member state of the UN, they have to abide by the UN Charter. That's the bare basic rule of being part of the UN. So from 1945, there was a law in place internationally that said every nation has to follow what the UN says. We don't need this pandemic agreement to actually implement that kind of overarching control across the globe. So why do they keep bringing out more and more documents? Well, because we've all heard about the slow boiling frog, haven't we? Leadership has always been convinced at the highest level within the nations and organizations of the world, because there is something they get from this. Remember, the merchants wax rich because of this. It's the lay people, it's us down here that needed to be boiled slowly. And as each one of these things comes out, if we don't recognize what it is and we just go along with it, we've been boiled a little bit hotter. Do you understand? This is you being slow boiled, not them. This has been in place for a very long time. I want to just talk about a little bit of history now about the World Health Organization, the overarching international control of what happens to your body. The Rockefeller Foundation was the one that helped to collaborate with the UN on the establishment of the World Health Organization. This is actually from the Rockefeller Foundation, from the WHO, website. But a report that came out just recently, not too long ago anyway, it actually highlighted some things about the Rockefeller Foundation. It was formed in 1913. So Rockefeller was a oil magnate, if you don't know anything about the history of the Rockefeller family. He made a lot of money from oil in America in particular. And he was very corrupt. He stole a lot of what he ended up having, And he actually formed, these monopolies and would push competition out of business by just simply being very, very corrupt. Anyway, he went through a whole bunch of legal cases that he was fighting. And by the time he got to 1911, he had a court rule that the Rockefeller Standard Oil Company was an illegal monopoly. So as part of that, he actually went, well, I'm going to do something good with this money. I'm going to establish a foundation that's going to be a charitable thing, and everyone's going to see me as wonderful. And so in 1913, he formed it. But as these guys in this report said, it was a way to shield some of his income from taxation and a way to garner prestige and influence in the US and world affairs. The Rockefeller Foundation went on to be the largest contributor of the League of Nations Health Organization. And they supported the League of Nations Health Organization with recruiting staff from their own foundation. And they would send some of their people from the Rockefeller Foundation to act on the advisory board. Sounds very unbiased, doesn't it? Anyway. After the creation of WHO, this same trend continued. So you've got staff from the Rockefeller Foundation who are actually staffing the World Health Organization. They went on to be involved in all aspects of public health from their very inception in 1913. They were the only health agency truly operating internationally until the foundation of the World Health Organization. And I think it was called the International Health Organization before it became part of the League of Nations. It helped to shape global public health to a greater extent than any other organization of its day. So why would Rockefeller, who was drilling for oil, choose that as a way of deflecting attention to his illegal affairs? Why health? Was he just particularly interested in health, do you think? Well, let's find out. This is a book, it's a historical book. It was written back in the 1970s, and it's very interesting actually going through it. Rockefeller, the medicine man. Most Americans, when they were sick, this is back in the early 1800s, consulted herbal practitioners, apprenticed mainly with other herbalists. Lay healers were distributed throughout the countryside. They seldom relied on healing for their entire support and charged little for their services. So that's the environment that Rockefeller, the senior that started the whole Standard Oil Company, he was born into. They had herbal healers, and people would pass down their understanding of how to treat disease from, mother to daughter and son, perhaps. I'm not sure about it. It specifically said it was more the women that tended to be the healers and would bring the herbal remedies and so forth. Probably something like some of you have experienced with some of your friends. Oh, how do you treat this? Oh, well, this is how I found it works. And you might speak to another person, then you go and do some research, and you come up with a solution that you think has been well considered, and you implement this process. Well, that was the environment that he was born into. And at the same time, the orthodox professionals, so the ones who were trained by the universities, their practice was, as it says here, greatly feared by much of the population. They offered little hope for curing disease, and everything that they did was generally unpleasant and often lethal. Sounds really great, doesn't it? Benjamin Rush, the most prominent physician in America from the Revolution through Jefferson's time, urged bleeding for just about everything. And then on top of it, they would add in this mercury solution or some other purgative, something that makes you vomit. And so by the time that the violent vomiting and purging that came from it, they were not excited. These people didn't enjoy it. It says, after attacking the body as well as the disease with bleeding, blistering, and purging, the physician administered an arsenic tonic to restore the weakened patient's vigor. Sounds delightful. You'd be terrified to be sick, wouldn't you? If you had that kind of outcome. But the herbalist's mild treatments were pleasanter and at the very least did not interfere with the natural rates of recovery. By the way, I don't know whether this person who wrote this book was a Christian, but boy, there's some things in here which were really amazing. So the trained medical professionals needed to change the perception of what they were doing and to increase the acceptance of their profession. Because there was actually, at the time, they were kind of being paid. Initially, they were being paid like the herbalists were. You know, if you've done something, I'll give you a little bit of money on the side kind of thing. But there was a law that came out in America where they had a guaranteed income that they needed to be paid. Well, that got revoked because people just didn't like it. And so, you know, it was kind of hit and miss as to whether they were going to get paid or whether they weren't, and even whether people would actually utilize their services. So they had to come up with a different way of operating. And the American Medical Association did some research, and they came up with this germ theory of disease. And it was especially attractive because it sort of was like the industrial era. It had this industrial component to it where, you know, it's very systematic. I do this, I get that outcome. And so they had this emphasis on discrete, specific, external causes against, causal agents of disease, which meant that you could then identify a specific therapy. It wasn't where you treated the person, you treated the disease. And as long as you could identify the disease, you could identify the solution, and you were guaranteed, they thought, to get the outcome that you wanted. So there's two ways to understand disease. Both of them aim to prevent disease. Both are supposedly about protecting health and saving lives. Both are supposedly using science and observation, but one is the germ theory, where disease is caused by pathogens. The focus is the pathogen or the germ. As long as I can find it, block it, kill it, whatever, it's gone. And the way that they do that is through vaccines or pharmaceuticals, and to a lesser extent, hygiene. But you know, you don't wash your hands every time that you want to bring your blood pressure down. According to this model, it is primarily around putting chemicals into your body, not just onto your hands. But the other view, which is more holistic, is about bringing your body back into balance. That disease is just the natural process of a body that is not working the way that it should. And so the idea is to bring it back into harmony with the way that it should work. And so you use some of the principles that Daniel was sharing this morning: healthy diet, sleep, and stress, and so forth. The first model that I've got on this page, which actually isn't the first model that ever existed. The first one was actually the body balance model, or the holistic view, because that was the one in the Garden of Eden. But the one that these guys were aiming at requires scientific experts. Kind of almost like, you know, you've got an Illuminati. The Illuminati's at the top. They know what it's all about. They're the educated ones. We're just the plebs down the bottom that have no understanding of how the whole body works. They become like the gods of health. It requires monetary expense, and it creates a blind dependency. You don't actually know. When you put something into your mouth, you have no idea what it does. You're not tracing it. You're not watching the interaction of your cells with it. You have literally no clue what it's doing, and you're believing that a scientist that you've never met, who may have nefarious principles behind them, you don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe they don't. I don't know. But you're believing that they have your best interest at heart and they actually knew what they were doing. And most of these people are not even godly. Literally, most scientists don't believe in God. So where does their inspiration come from? I'll leave your imagination to work that one out. The individual, on the other hand, becomes the expert, instructed by God. And there's minimal to no monetary expense. You know, I can go for a walk and it costs me nothing. For most of us, if we're on tank water, particularly out in places like this, the rain doesn't cost you anything. Maybe getting it from the tank to your house, you've got some electricity, but you know, it's minimal. Having a sleep, how much does that cost? Do you have to pay anything to get onto your bed at night? Yeah. But it creates an element of self-sufficiency or informed dependency on God. It's not dependency on another man who has potentially nefarious purposes behind what he's doing. So Rockefeller, going back to the book that we were talking about before, his wealth became the largest single source of capital for the development of medical science. He was all about the germ theory. So he converted the medical education system and the public health programs in the United States and abroad. He defined the strategy for capital investment in medicine. It was an investment with a clear return. Because if you can identify a germ that has a specific treatment, you've got a source of income. And it can be lucrative. I'll show you in a minute just how lucrative. But he was so focused on this that he even formed, and this is, there is a lot of information out there about Rockefeller. If you just start doing research and his nefarious principles and practices, there's a lot you can find. But I like to go to primary sources when it comes to some of these conspiracies because, you know, I don't like being called a conspiracy theorist. There is conspiracies, there's theories and there's facts. I prefer to deal with ones that I can absolutely, unequivocally prove. This is a congressional record from 1942, during World War II. And it's talking about the agreement between IG Farben and Standard Oil, which is Rockefeller's company. Who was IG Farben, or what was that company? It was responsible, this is Britannica Encyclopedia, I believe they're still trustworthy. They are responsible for Auschwitz. They set up a factory to produce products using the slaves that they had garnered from, you know, imprisoning the Jews and other people that the Nazis had decided weren't worth living. They were responsible for conducting experiments on the inmates, and they were responsible for the extermination. They were the ones that created the drugs to kill them off. This is who Standard Rockefeller was in partnership with. Can two walk together lest they be agreed? Amos 3:3 says. Can they? If you knew that there was a company that was involved in doing this, would you be in a union with them? He was, and the reason why is because it was lucrative. Now, what about today? Because Rockefeller the Rockefeller Foundation still actually funds a lot of WHO projects, but it's no longer the major funder. It is now the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation from the year 2000. It was set up in 1999, and now it's become the biggest funder for the World Health Organization. So it's the largest funder because America was actually the largest funder, but we all know that America pulled out of the World Health Organization, not out of the UN, by the way. I just want to make that clear. They've not pulled out of the UN, just the World Health Organization. So the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation at this time was the second largest funder, but now is the largest funder. And then it lists Germany and the UK next, and then the fifth biggest donor is Gavi, which stands for the Global Alliance for Vaccines and Immunization. I mean, really, the fourth largest financial contributor to the World Health Organization is primarily concerned with vaccination, the germ theory. And, forgot to tell you, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the primary funder for Gavi. So who is actually funding everything that the WHO does? The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is the primary funder. And it's not even just the money that they give. At the bottom of this little paragraph here, it says, a recent study describes how the Gates Foundation influenced WHO by paying, or WHO, by paying for the cost and donating the time of management consultants to advise on the organization's reform processes. Are you serious? Like, this is not even just, you know, we're giving you money. We're telling you how to operate in your optimal way as well. Sorry, I'll go on. And then it says it's not just the fact that they're giving money. It has influenced how the WHO operates. So 1% of the funding that comes from the Gates Foundation goes towards non-communicable diseases, even though they account for 74% of global deaths. Are they interested in health? If 74% of the deaths in this world are from non-communicable diseases, and you only spend 1% of money that gets given on that, is that reflective? No. And then it goes on to say, none of the money ever gets spent on dealing with the consumption of ultra-processed, sugary, salty foods and drinks that drive obesity-related morbidity and mortality, or alcohol, which is a major cause of avoidable morbidity and mortality. And the reason why? Well, they just happen to have quite a number of shares in Coca-Cola, McDonald's, Kraft Heinz, and this German company, which I'm not going to massacre the name with, that makes beer, the world's largest producers of beer. They have a vested interest in not dealing with these issues, and so none of the money gets spent on that. Oops, I think I just went backwards or something. What's just happened? All right. And then it's not just the money that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have given to the World Health Organization. They're money that comes from everywhere, which member states are supposed to contribute. Only 6.9% of their total expenditure is on non-communicable diseases. So it doesn't just influence what happens with their money, it happens to influence what happens to all money. And I really liked this term that they used in this article. They called it philanthrocapitalism. A bit of a mouthful there, but they harness the power of the market to generate social and financial returns for philanthropic investments. This is an investment to make more money, not to care about people's health. And not only does it do that, this is going back to the report that I shared earlier. This guy, Dr. Arata Kochi, who was the head of WHO's malaria program, said that the Gates Foundation was dominating research in the areas of malaria treatment. And he says, Gates has created a cartel with research leaders linked so closely that each has vested interest to safeguard the work of others. Obtaining an independent review of scientific evidence is becoming increasingly difficult. Do you think this has been set up to be a health dictatorship because of a reason? And yes, on the American government securities website, it actually has an investment of the Bill and Melinda Gates in CureVac, a vaccine company. So yes, they're interested in vaccines. There's a few articles out there. I just put a couple of screenshots. I'm not going to go through the details of these, but you can find articles that show you that actually philanthropy is actually all about the philanthropists becoming wealthy. This is not about them actually doing good for society, redistributing their wealth. It is about them becoming wealthier. Now, according to the IRS, which is like the Australian Tax Office, they only need the philanthropic organisations, like this one that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, they only have to donate to philanthropic causes 5% of their overall assets. So 95% can be kept for investment. And so you can see in 1999, when Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was first set up, they had $17 billion as assets that they were then spending 5% in philanthropic causes. Now you would think, if this was about, just generally doing charitable exercises, yeah, the balance sheet may go up a little bit, but not too much, because, they're more interested in giving the money away, yeah? And being, generous towards society so that everyone becomes healthy. Well, unfortunately, that's not the reason why they're doing it. And so between 1999 and 2025, they had 400% growth in assets. It is a very lucrative business. It reminds me of this verse in the Bible. It says, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them. They dictate, and they exercise that authority upon them. And they that exercise authority upon them are called benefactors. They look like they're doing good for us, but they only do it because they want something in return. That's what this is all about. And the UN is perfectly happy with it. They think it's wonderful. And they say foundations see themselves as fully fledged development partners rather than donors, and expect close involvement in activities such as policy discussion, advocacy, and problem analysis. They have become a source of valuable development knowledge. You mean money? Development knowledge. They run highly visible campaigns in the media and influence international development policy. This is about money. It is not about care. It is not about health. It is about getting rich. The merchants wax rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So what are the lessons? I'm giving you some financial lessons here. Start up a philanthropic foundation because it is very lucrative, particularly if it's in healthcare. You can influence global health policies through the UN, and it's once again a very lucrative affair. If I tell an international governing political entity that actually has overarching control over the governments of the world how to do things, I might just have, a way of investing to make more money. The UN will facilitate and endorse the agenda of these wealthy, elite philanthropists. And global health policy is not in the best interest of the average person. It is in the best interest of the merchants of the earth. Because the merchants are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. But whose delicacies? Well, as I said, the final end dictatorship includes a health dictatorship, but it is a religious or unfaithful church. It is political, it reigns over kings, and it influences all nations through false teachings and doctrines. And as I said, it makes the merchants rich. The only way that all of this could happen is because all of the leaders of the world, not just the politicians, all of the kings of the world have bought into this. And it's just up to us to decide whether we will or not. Because at the end of the day, they're going to persecute all those who fail to comply. All those who fail to worship, give their time, give their money, give their body to this system. As I said earlier, the Bible predicted successfully all of these empires. The description of this final empire very much matches the Holy Roman Empire. It was a church and it was a political system. It said it was God, even though it wasn't. It shared doctrine that was all about persecuting the saints and those who followed Jesus with all their heart from the Bible. At the end of time, we're told from the Bible that we would have a system that replicates or is an image of the Holy Roman Empire. That's in Revelation chapter 13. And there is no other power on earth that matches this more fully than the United Nations. I mean, it even has a laurel wreath around it. That's indicating it's Roman. And do you know what the laurel wreath is? It is a sign of victory, divinity, and power. Look it up. That's what it meant. If they wore that, that was a sign that they had actually reached a God state. The UN attempts to be like God. Why is that? Well, because it was everything that the Holy Roman Empire had dreamed of. You know, there's one thing that they didn't achieve. As the Holy Roman Empire, it says that they were to reign over the entire world. If you look in Revelation chapter 13, it's before verse 11. In my brain, I can see it on the page, but I can't see the verse. But it says they were to reign over the entire earth. They never achieved that. They reigned over Europe. They kind of went into the UK and that sort of thing, but they never reigned over the entire earth. Sorry, I've just been instructed I'm wandering too far. But this, as it says, this is the Pope talking to the United Nations at their inaugural speech, the Pope's inaugural speech. And by the way, whenever he uses the word we, he's actually saying me, but because he's God and he's royal, he uses the third person pronoun. But anyway, this is a wish born in our heart for almost 20 centuries, and it is being accomplished. This is what we always wanted. The Pope and this system have always wanted this. This is everything we've ever dreamed of. We are celebrating the epilogue to a laborious pilgrimage. This is the end point. That's what an epilogue is. At the end of the story, you get an epilogue. It's always, the little bit of extra information. Well, this is the end point of their pilgrimage, of their journey, in search of an opportunity to speak heart to heart. My heart doesn't resonate with his heart. I'm not sure about you, but he wants to speak heart to heart with the whole world. That is what they didn't achieve when they reigned as the Holy Roman Empire, but now they can. Our message is meant to be, first of all, a solemn moral ratification of this lofty institution. Did the institution need to be ratified by the Roman Catholic Church? Oh, maybe it did. Morally it did. Spiritually it did. The church is coming to the United Nations as an expert on humanity, that we bring this organization the support and approval of our recent predecessors, that of the Catholic hierarchy, and our own. Convinced as we are that this organization represents the obligatory path, you do not get a choice, of modern civilization and world peace. There's a verse in the book of Daniel that says he will destroy many through peace. When people want peace at any cost to their own individual conscience, this plays into this perfectly. Remember, it said the merchants waxed rich because of the abundance of her delicacies, because of the teachings. Every nation will drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. They actually want to drink her teachings. And what are her teachings? I'm sure many of you have heard about this, but the common good is the teaching that permeates just about everything of the Roman Catholic Church and of the United Nations. And the only way that we can achieve the common good, the good for every person, is that we work together. That's the only possible way, they say. And it includes a redistribution of wealth among the different areas of the planet. Philanthropy appears to be a redistribution of wealth. So I can get away with what I'm doing because it just looks like I'm putting my money here, but then it gets spread over to here and over to here. Needless to say, it all comes back with, manifold, multiplication. It says, God destined the earth and all it contains for all men and all people so that all created things would be shared. Now, if you really drill down to what this means, nothing belongs to you. Absolutely nothing, because all created things includes you. Did you realize you're created? Everything is to be shared by the general community. You have no choice. And that's why, during COVID, are Christians morally obligated to be vaccinated for COVID-19? Well, the Catholics instructed their priests not to sign religious exemption requests because you need to look after the community. Your body does not belong to you, it belongs to the community. And so vaccination for COVID-19 is a moral obligation, not a health obligation, a moral one, because you don't belong to you or to God, you belong to the community. And of course, so that we make sure that people are moral, we have national and international agreements and a juridical order that educates and specifies the exercise of this right. A lot of people, particularly those who study Bible prophecy, will say, we just need to look for Christian nationalism and what Christian nationalism is doing, particularly in America, and see that they're, trying to enforce religious practices on the world, and then we know the world is coming to an end. Well, do you know what? The Roman Catholic Church was not a Christian nationalist organization. When it was the Holy Roman Empire, yes, it had its own papal states, but its rule went beyond its papal states. It was an international political power. And the United Nations fulfills these requirements. It has the ability to have international agreements that enforces the ideology of the common good. So, we were talking about a health dictatorship. And we spoke about how there is two ways to understand God can be our informer when it comes to health. He is intimately concerned with our health and well-being. He can instruct us through helping us to find the cause and the best solution. There is minimal to no monetary expense, and it creates, as I said, an element of self-sufficiency. But the world doesn't like that, particularly the merchants of the earth. Do you know the Pope issued a coin to commemorate what happened during COVID? Do you notice what's on the front of that coin? Oops, sorry. Keep doing this. Do you notice what's on the front of this coin? It's someone being jabbed for a vaccine. It was to commemorate COVID. But what is strange about this coin is not so much that. That is weird. Why would you make a coin like that? But anyway, what is strange about that? See these other coins? I'm going to expand them in the next picture. What do you notice is on the front of every other coin? It is a picture of a pope. So why on the front of this coin do they put a picture of someone being vaccinated? Is it because the Pope, who is a dictator, by the way, he is an absolute monarch. What he says goes in the Vatican, in the papal state. Is it because the spirit of the papacy, the dictatorship, has actually become the face of every one of us, if we haven't rejected it? That spirit has become part of society because we've been slow-boiled by people who've wanted to wax rich through the abundance of her delicacies. So how do we escape this dictatorship? The same way that many of us may have escaped during the pandemic. I know how our family escaped. This is actually a picture of our house that we had on the Gold Coast. It had fruit trees, it had veggie gardens. It was a very nice home. We sold it, but we bought this. Glamorous. It's actually now torn, but that's not what we went, the Lord's going to look after us somehow. We put our best effort into looking for another home, cheaper, so we could live off the sale of our home, because both Daniel and I, health professionals, we both chose to trust the Lord rather than medical science. And the Lord came through. We have not regretted it once. Not once. The Lord has been faithful. And I remember someone coming to our home to buy some things from me, and she said, because every time anyone came, I would always say to them, they'd come for the thing that they'd bought or were buying, and I'd say, anything else you'd like to take? And they'd like, you mean anything? Yeah, anything. And at our old home. At our old home when we were selling it, because, there's only so much that you can fit in a tent. It's pretty small. It was the best tent, by the way. It was on special. I went there and it was on special. It was amazing. And it had lights. That's pretty exciting for a tent, it had lights. And I was thinking, I said to them, I need a tent that my family of 4 could live in for a long time. And they went, okay. Well, this is what we suggest. this lady, she came to me to buy something from our place, and I said, anything else you'd like? And she said, where are you going? Are you going overseas? I went, no, we're moving into a tent. And when she looked at our home, she went, why are you moving into a tent? And I said, well, because both my husband and I are health professionals, we chose not to get the jab. Anyway, it launched into this amazing Bible study, by the way. And she goes, but aren't you scared? I said, no, because perfect love casts out all fear. I believe God loves me. And He's going to have me covered somehow. It's going to be okay. And He's proven Himself. He has proven Himself out of sight. We actually had someone come and visit us last night that's never been to where we currently live. And, we've got all these veggie gardens and fruit trees and accommodation and all this kind of stuff. And he said, so how long have you lived here? And we said, 4 years. And you've done all of this in 4 years? Well, actually, no, it was about in 2 years. In 2 years! Well, we had no job for 2 years. And so we just worked really hard. And he was like, I can't believe you've done all of this in 2 years. And we went, well, it was God that helped us. It wasn't us. And I can guarantee you, if you trust the Lord, He is able to be a deliverer. But I want to end with 2 stories from the Bible. And they're both very related to each other. They're in the same chapter. It says, and behold, there came a man named Jairus, and he was a ruler of the synagogue. And he fell down at Jesus' feet and besought him that he would come into his house, for he had one only daughter, very special, about 12 years of age, and she lay dying. But as he went, the people thronged him. And of course, Jesus was delayed. Can you just imagine this father? He's like, oh, she's dying, come now, please. And he's getting delayed. Jesus has the ability to disappear. There's another time when Jesus was actually going to be killed if he hadn't have just walked through the crowd unnoticed. He could have done that, but he allowed himself to be delayed. And there was this as well. A woman having an issue of blood, 12 years, which had spent all her living upon physicians, neither could be healed of any, came behind him and touched the border of his garment, and immediately her issue of blood was staunched or stopped. So he gets interrupted on his journey to heal this child by this old woman, or this woman that's well and truly past her prime. She's had her life. What about this little girl? Why is he being delayed? But there's a lesson to be learnt here. The first lesson from this lady's story is that she touched the border of his garment, which was to remind everyone of the law. Around the border of their garment, it says in Numbers chapter 15, they were to place a ribbon, which is ribbon in modern day English, of blue around the bottom of their garment, and it was to remind them of the law. She was reminded as she reached out of the law. Something like the things that we went through this morning with Daniel. And Jesus asked who touched him. Even though there was a multitude that pressed all around him, he didn't just keep pressing on. He was like delayed further by worrying about who touched him. And the woman turns and she says, and when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling and falling down before him and declared unto him before all the people for what cause she had touched him and how she was healed immediately. Immediately she was healed. I want to emphasize that. All she had to do was touch the border of his garments. And he said unto her, daughter, be of good comfort. Thy faith has made thee whole. Go in peace. But Jesus was delayed further. And by the time all of this goes on, someone turns up to tell Jairus, your daughter is dead. Can you just imagine what would have been going through his mind? Like every single little second, it would have felt like it was, a doomsday clock. He knew every second was minutes, well, it was the seconds between his life the life of his daughter being maintained or being lost. And then he hears this. After this woman does this thing, and oh Lord, can you just imagine? But the father had to maintain his faith even when all the evidence was contrary. Is my daughter going to live? Sometimes we need to take a step of faith when everything seems contrary. You know, we had 2 children. 2 responsible people don't walk away from a job and a home and a comfortable life with 2 children. 2 people who are involved in ministering to the community do not walk away from ministry unless they walk by faith. Sometimes we have to walk contrary to the evidence. And when Jesus came to the house, he told the little girl to arise, and straight away, just like the woman, immediately, straight away she was restored to life. There's a lesson to be learnt though. Both these stories, if you combine them together, share an amazing lesson. Both had to fall at the feet of Jesus. They had to be in submission to Christ and all his law. If you want to break free from any dictatorship, particularly a health one, you need to fall at the feet of Jesus and be willing to obey his law. The one who was not in the prime of her life was healed immediately. The one who was in the prime of her life was delayed. She was dead first. Sometimes when we talk about healing and we go, you'll be healed if you have enough faith. But sometimes there is a delay. Whenever I think about people talking about healing, there's someone who's very close to me, who was very close to me, and she didn't get that immediate healing. But she will. The moment Jesus turned up, that little girl was healed. The moment that Jesus turns up again, those people who didn't get healing in this life, right now, will get it. And sometimes they'll be struck down in the prime of their life. And those who have had their life seem to get healed. Sometimes we have to walk by faith. It doesn't make sense, but we need to trust. And as I said, their faith and belief was what was necessary for Christ to work. The presence of Jesus was able to provide immediate healing for both of them, and both were made whole. At the end of time, every tear will be wiped. Every tear will be wiped from our eyes. There will be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things have passed away. Everything. There are 2 systems of healing. They both offer healing. They both have experts. They both require faith and submission. They both supposedly utilize scientific understanding. Both of them say they offer freedom. Both of them require worship. But only one has given choice and offered true freedom. Only one gives eternal life and true wholeness. And only one where the expert has sacrificed everything and gains nothing but your love. This system is the one that Christ died to give us. So if you want to break free from the health dictatorship, learn about the true healer who loves you, and step out in faith, fall at his feet, and touch the border of his garment. Be obedient to his laws. I just want to finish with prayer. If you're able, we'll kneel, seeing as I can move away from the microphone, and we'll pray. Our precious Heavenly Father, the world as we know it is coming to an end, but the world is also coming to an end. It's clear in Scripture that that is what is going to happen. And as time goes on, what we saw in COVID will seem like it just was a walk in the park. Everything will be connected back to the overarching control of our mind and body and everything else, because nothing will belong to us according to the powers of this world. But Lord, we give our lives over to your hands. We want to experience the true fullness of wholeness that you alone can give. We may not be very far in our Christian walk. Maybe this is new to some people who are here today. But Lord, we want to try you. We want to see if we can trust you. So Lord, if there's a little glimmer, if there's a little flicker of faith in our heart, Lord, please let it burn into being a bonfire for you, Lord, so that we can experience the everlasting life that you promise to give us. In Jesus' name, amen.